Hey, hi everybody. I think we're going to get started. All the rooms have been closed. So my name is Daniela Pirraglia. I'm an associate registrar here at Innis College, and I'm also the financial aid advisor. And we're here to talk about all things related to money. So here's our agenda for the day. We're going to go over the costs of attending university, so you all have an understanding of what those costs will be, including tuition and living costs, etc. We're going to review how do you make payments, the various resources that you might have available to you. We're going to touch on budgeting. We're going to review our payment deadlines, and then there will be time for questions at the end. This presentation will run about 30 or so minutes, and it is scheduled to go to 1:15. And so I'm happy to, you can put questions in the chat, and some of my colleagues are in the space. They can answer questions there. And we can also answer questions at the end of the presentation. And then if you have like a really specific scenario, like relevant to you personally, then I welcome emails either to me personally or to our main registrar.innis email address. And I'm happy to work with you one-on-one. Okay, so these are the tuition fees for the, this is not, hold on a second, sorry. Not the right. Okay, these are not the tuition fees for this year. Sorry, I don't know why this is not the right slide. So the tuition fees for the upcoming year, they're slightly more than what you're seeing here. Okay, so we will post an updated presentation in okay, so Dryden just put in the chat fees for the upcoming year. And there will also be an updated slide deck in the Quarkus so that you'll be able to see it there. So just add a little bit to all of these totals. So there are two types of ways of being charged fees. There's the program fee and there's the course fee. All students will automatically be charged the program fee upon entry. And on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about what course fees mean and how you qualify for course fees. But for right now, I would encourage you to look at the program fee and then the incidentals. So your fees are made up of your programs and then incidentals, which for most of you most likely will be full-time incidentals. And then there's three categories of fees. So there's domestic students who are from Ontario, there's domestic students who are from outside of Ontario, and then there are international students. And I do want to flag that for international students, there's also an additional UHIP fee. It's not $756 this year, it's like $948. So students are initially charged a program fee in the fall-winter session, like I mentioned. If you are taking 3.5 full credit equivalents or fewer in year one, you could be eligible for course fees. Like I said, for most of you, that will not be applicable. In most cases, students will be in 4.0 FCEs or more. Many programs require you to be in 4.0 FCEs or more in order to like meet certain program requirements and enroll in programs after first year. So it really isn't relevant, I would say, to most of you. But the main thing to take away from this slide is just know that it is feasible to pay course fees. Maybe there's a certain scenario where you want to reduce costs, and if that does apply to you, I encourage you to reach out to us so that we can talk about what that would mean for you specifically. The other thing I want to highlight is that academic drop deadlines and financial drop deadlines are very different. The deadlines related to financial matters happen much, much earlier in the term. So there are three types of registration statuses that you can see on Acorn. So hopefully most of you have logged into Acorn. You can see the system. That's where you're going to be enrolling in courses. And so right now, what you will see is that your status is INVIT, and that means invited to enroll, invited to register. Once you enroll in courses and then you trigger registration, which we will talk about how you do that in an upcoming slide, then you will flip to registered. And finally, the other status you might see is FINCA, so that means financially canceled. And financially canceled just means that you failed to register and you were removed from courses and or like removed from the term. Being financially canceled isn't necessarily a bad thing. For example, all students will be invited to enroll in courses next summer. But if you don't enroll in courses, then you will be financially canceled for the summer term. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just important to know that these are the different statuses that you could see in Acorn. So on Acorn is where you're going to access a whole bunch of financial items that are important. So your invoice. Invoices are not mailed to students. They are only posted to your Acorn. Right now, you will not see an invoice. Invoices are meant to be turned on, I believe it's like mid-July. And so, like I said, once that switch is flipped around July 15th, you'll be able to see your invoice and it will show program fees. And this is also where you'll access your tax documents. So come February 2027, you'll be able to log into Acorn and see those tax documents when you're filing your taxes. Those are important documents to download. You are also able to add direct deposit information in Acorn. I recommend that everybody just do that now in case you are ever eligible for a refund, whether it's because you overpaid or you got an award or something of that nature. By having direct deposit, it just means that your refund will make it to you more easily and more quickly. Otherwise, it'll be sent as a check. And I have seen many checks get lost in the mail. And then there's like a whole process to get a new check. And so in order to avoid all that, I just recommend adding your banking information now so that you have direct deposit set up. Acorn is also where you're able to do your OSAP, out of province aid or award deferrals. And we'll talk about what that looks like. And then finally, if you need a confirmation of enrollment for something like an RESP or maybe your bank, you'll be able to download that there. If you have an RESP provider that requires a really specific form to be filled out, we can do that for you as well. You just need to email us at the registrar.innis email address. Generally speaking, depending on what the form is asking for, we may not be able to fill it out until you actually enroll in courses. But if you're not sure, you can just reach out to us and then we can take a look at the form and let you know what we can fill out and when. So the invoice has your formal costs related to your education and could include tuition, your incidentals, auxiliary fees, which are related to like a specific course. Say you take a lab course that has an extra lab fee. And then if you're in residence, generally speaking, those are also on the invoice. Informal costs are not on your invoice, and that could include rent if you're not living in residence, transit, your books, food. Even if you have a meal plan through U of T, that generally isn't on your invoice. If you're living in, say, the Innis residence, then you need to purchase a plan through the meal plan office, and that's all done separately. That's not going to flow to your invoice. So now we're going to talk about ways that we can get registered. So the primary way that many students will get registered would be making a payment from within Canada. And so the most important thing to take away from this slide is your account number. You can see here I've highlighted in yellow where it says Rosie account. Your account number for payment purposes is a combination of 5 digits from your surname and your student number. So it's not just your student number. There are some letters from your last name in there. And yeah, that is what you're going to use if you're going to pay online, or if you prefer to go in person, pay at your bank, you could just print your invoice and bring that in with you. You can also pay by credit card on Acorn. Generally speaking, I don't recommend that people do this unless it's absolutely necessary. There is a 2.5% convenience fee that is charged to students for making a payment on Acorn with a credit card. It's charged technically through Moneris. And I know sometimes people say like, oh, well, I can get points, or my parents can get points or something. I think it's very unlikely that the amount of points that you can get will outweigh that service charge. So in general, I don't recommend paying by credit card unless you absolutely have to for some reason. So for those of you who are making a payment from outside of Canada, you can pay via Convera or Flywire. There's information here. Dryden's posting links in the chat. Thank you, Dryden. So you can see what that looks like. In general, like for a Canadian bank, I would say 3 to 5 business days. When you pay, it should show up on Acorn. But for Convera and Flywire, it can take longer. So it's just really important to give yourself lots of time in order for your payment to process by deadlines. Like I would say, pay like at least 2 weeks prior to the deadline. And the other thing of note is you should not pay more than your tuition, residence, meal plan, and other fees. So don't, let's say your invoice is $80,000 and don't pay $100,000 and then expect the university to reimburse you the difference. Just pay the $80,000 and then the other $20,000 your parents can send you in a different way. So the other way that you can get registered is based on a deferral. So you can defer based on OSAP or other provincial aid loans, such as OSAP or aid from another province. You can also defer your fees based on a major war, like I mentioned. There's a button on Acorn that will be there, I believe, like later in July. And that will allow you to defer. By deferring, you're basically telling the university, like, yes, hey, please register me. And then, my award is going to come in and reduce my fees owing, or my OSAP is going to come in and reduce my tuition owing. It's still your responsibility to pay for whatever is remaining after your student loan or award is processed. But basically, it just gives you extra time to make a payment. If you have any questions about this, you can always email us. So there are some various supports that might be available to you. And so we're going to talk about all of them. And each one does have its own slide. So I'm just going to keep going to the next one. So for some of you, you might have support from family, or you might have your own savings. So, for anyone who, you're presumably not in school this summer, I encourage you to find any sort of work, full-time work, part-time work, whatever you can, so that you can even save a little bit. Perhaps your parents have set aside an RESP for you. Perhaps they're saying, oh, we're gonna pay for your tuition and you're gonna pay for your living costs. Maybe they're gonna give you a lump sum, or maybe they're gonna give you money every month. The main thing to do, what I always recommend to students and parents, for any parents who are here in the room today, is just everyone talk together as you make your plans and have really clear expectations of one another. So for parents, if you're like, okay, give, I'm going to give Johnny $1,000 a month, and then it's his responsibility to allocate that as he can, then that's fine. Tell that to Johnny. Perhaps you would rather just like pay tuition up front and then know that, okay, that's paid, and then their student loan is gonna cover the other stuff. Whatever the plan is, it's just really important to talk to one another now, so that everyone knows what to expect of one another. So now I'm going to spend a couple of slides talking about OSAP. So OSAP stands for Ontario Student Assistance Program. It is a federal and provincial financial aid program for students attending university. In order to be eligible, you do need to be a Canadian citizen, a permanent resident, or protected person. So for any students in the space today who are attending U of T on a study permit, you would not be eligible for this program. There is also an Ontario residency component. So you have to have lived in Ontario for at least 12 consecutive months without attending full-time post-secondary school. And applications are managed by the University Registrar's office. So just an important thing to know is that if you ever get a message from OSAP saying, like, contact your financial aid office, technically in this case, the financial aid office that OSAP is referring to is the University Registrar's office. They have full access to your application. They can see way more details than I can see. And so if there is something going on with your OSAP, you can reach out to them. And applications are open now. So if you haven't applied yet, I would encourage you to start that process. So OSAP is made up of grants and loans. The grants, generally speaking, do not need to be repaid as long as you meet certain academic standards. I know that OSAP has been in the news a lot of late because of the changes that the provincial government has changed. So, the general gist is there's going to be more loans and fewer grants available to students. So that does mean more student debt to students. But I still think this is a very good program. It has many benefits as compared to, say, like a bank loan. It is interest-free while you're in school. So as long as you're not off for more than 6 months at a time from full-time study, your loans remain interest-free. And federal loans are actually interest-free on an ongoing basis. So there is no interest on the federal portion of your loans. It's based largely on parental income. So whatever your parents made in 2025 is generally what the OSAP is using in order to do the assessment. They are also looking at your course load. So if you're in program fees versus course fees, and then where you live during the school year. So are you living with your parents, or are you living away from your parents? If you live away from your parents, then you would be eligible for more funding than if you live at home. But then, of course, there's added costs for living away from your parents. OSAP is always directed to your U of T fees first. So If you just are paying for tuition, you're not in residence, then maybe your OSAP covers your fall fees and then you get a little bit of money directed to you. If you're living in residence and maybe your OSAP is higher, it still may not be enough to cover all of your fall fees. So anything that's remaining, you would be responsible for paying for. I always encourage people to just apply. Like if you're not sure, if you're like, I don't know if my parents make too much, I'm not, I don't know, or maybe your parents are like, I don't know if I want you to take a loan. Like you can always start the application process. You can get an assessment, and then there's a whole bunch of paperwork that you have to sign. Like at any point before you submit everything, you can always stop the process, right? So if you apply and you're like, oh, I'm not gonna get anything, or I'm only gonna get $1,000 in loans, and like that's not worth it to me. Like that's of course your decision. There is also the ability to take the grants only, although of course if they're like smaller, then it would be a smaller amount of money that you're eligible for. The thing about OSAP is that it is the key to open up the door to other types of funding, and what I say like free funding. So we're going to talk about UTAPs in a slide or two, and having OSAP or other provincial aid is the key to be eligible for UTAPs, which is a U of T grant. Having OSAP is also one of the requirements in order to apply for our Innis grant. So I always encourage people to apply. And honestly, as long as you're using the money that you get from OSAP on like school related things, so you're not spending it on like going on a vacation or something like that, like if you're using it for school, then I do consider it to be like good debt. And yeah, so apply basically. If you're eligible, you should apply. So for those of you who are coming from another province, you would have access to out of province financial aid. Again, you should apply now. Processing can take time, especially for folks from out of province. The University Registrar's Office has an out of province request portal. So there might be documents that you have to submit and in order for U of T to complete. And this is the portal that you're going to submit them through. By submitting documents through the portal, this is also how your fee deferral on Acorn will be turned on. If you go to this website down here, it has information about all the different provinces and like all the different kinds of forms that U of T might require. There's some like really specific information for students from BC, for example. There's a certain appendix that U of T has to fill out, and that is sent electronically. So take a look at that if you haven't already. And if you have any questions, you can always contact the URO via their service portal. So as I touched on already, UTAPS is a U of T grant program managed by the University Registrar's Office. It is a program that's meant to cover unmet financial need. It is a grant, and so it does not need to be repaid. In order to be eligible for this, you do need to be a Canadian citizen, permanent resident, or protected person. So again, unfortunately, if you're here studying on a study permit, you would not be eligible for this program. You do need to be receiving OSAP, out of province aid, or Indigenous funding to be eligible for this program. So this is, OSAP is the key that gets you into this door in order to be considered for this funding. It is managed by the URO. I recommend that you apply now. In general, I actually recommend that you apply for this at the same time as you're applying for OSAP or out of province aid. By applying for them at the same time, it's just ensuring that all the numbers that you submit are the same. They're asking for very similar types of information. Like the UTAP application is basically a truncated OSAP application. So sometimes I've seen students run into issues where, they filled out OSAP at the beginning of summer and then they did their UTAPs at the end of the summer, and then some of the numbers are different and that can cause delays. You have to take action to fix it. So in general, I just recommend applying for both of them at the same time. And the early deadline is September the 16th. So for students who are getting OSAP who meet that early deadline, you could be getting UTAPs as early as like mid-October. So we do have some buckets of funding available through Innis specifically. So at Innis, we have two types of awards. We have awards that are automatic consideration that are largely based on your grades, your academic performance. I run this process on in-course merit awards every fall. So the first time you would be potentially eligible to be considered for those awards would be fall 2027. We look at students who have completed their 5th, 10th, or 15th full credit equivalent, who have a 3.7 or higher, but you don't have to do anything to be eligible for those awards other than like meet the criteria. You don't have to apply for those. And in general, the awards are around $400. So, it's like a nice recognition, but it's not a large value award. We also have awards that we collect applications for that are largely based on either leadership contributions or identity. That process will run starting every February. We will send newsletters to that effect once the applications are open. Dryden spends a lot of time on our newsletters, so it's just important to keep an eye on those. We also always have a financial aid and awards section in our registrar office newsletters. So if money is something that you are paying like particular attention to, I would recommend skimming those sections every month just to see if there's anything else you can apply for. We also have a grant here at Innis that you'll be able to apply for starting early October. This grant is meant for unmet financial need for students who have OSAP or out of province aid, or for any student experiencing a financial emergency. So if you are here on a study permit, generally speaking, you're not eligible for the grant, but if you did have some sort of emergency or your parents couldn't send you money one month and you can't pay for rent, this is something that you could apply for. And if you're not certain if you're eligible, you can always reach out to me and we can discuss what's going on. The university also has a tool called Award Explorer where you can find many awards, and that is what we're going to talk about, I believe, on the next screen. Yeah, so this is Award Explorer. This is, I'm not going to go to the website, but this is exactly what it looks like. You can see at the top that it has various facets that you can search by. What I've done here is I've turned on the filters so you can see, Innis. I recommend that you put in course because that it's the same as like a returning student. So you would be returning to study, open to domestic or international, depending on your status. I recommend leaving nature of award to all, and then application required. I would put that to yes. You could select all, but then this list is going to be even bigger. You really just want to be looking at the ones where you actually have to take action. So you can see here, based on the facets that I've selected, there's 320 awards, and then you would have to go through them one by one to see, okay, what are the extra criteria? Do I actually meet this? And then how do I apply? Each of these should have their own link where you can click and find more information. And anytime you see UTAPs, just know that there's that. UTAPs is all one application, so you wouldn't be applying for each specific UTAPs. It's just the one application, and then where your money comes from can vary based on what you're eligible for. And the other thing I want to note is that the application deadline date sometimes might not make sense. Like if you see a date where it's 2020, it's obviously that's 6 years ago now. I recommend just ignore that deadline and actually click on the yes apply or the learn more, and that should take you to the place where you can find more information about how to apply and what the deadline is. Okay, so there are two awards that I want to highlight, admission awards. So we have an admission award for Black students. It's worth at least $500. And so it's for students entering first year who self-identify as Black. You can see the QR code in the upper right-hand corner. That is where you can go to apply for that if you haven't already. And then we also have an admission scholarship for Indigenous peoples. It's also worth at least $500. And for students who indicated they were Indigenous on UAC, then you would have already been notified of this. If for some reason you didn't identify as Indigenous on your UAC application, then you can just email us at registrar.innis@utoronto.ca so that we can include you. So some of you might be considering part-time work. If in general, we don't recommend working part-time in first year. I think there is just so much change happening already. For many of you, it's going to be the first time that you're living away from home. You're going to be, going to school. Your schedule is going to look totally different. And so I think working in first year it could be challenging, but perhaps you need to work, or perhaps you really want to work. And so if that's the case, just make sure you consider your timetable, consider your commuting time that you have to spend, any other obligations you might have, like if you're a varsity athlete or something like that. The university does maintain a job board with internal and external partners. And so you can find jobs, either at U of T and beyond U of T through this job board. And then the university also has a work study program that is for students who are enrolled in courses. These are on-campus jobs. I think they're a really good way to gain experience. I think work study for an incoming student, might be less likely to get that kind of job. I think from second year on, I think it's much more likely just to have some experience, like of being at U of T. But that's not to say you shouldn't apply for them. You definitely can. Just in general, I recommend applying for them as soon as the positions become available because students apply and then they are hired on a rolling basis. So just because the deadline says like, whatever, end of September, I would not, if you see a job that you're really interested in applying in, I would not leave it to them because if you do, then it's a very strong likelihood that that office will have hired prior to that. So there are other type of loans that you may need to consider, possibly a student line of credit from a Canadian bank if needed. Sometimes I meet with students whose parents, like they make a lot of money, so maybe they're not eligible for OSAP or they're not eligible for enough OSAP. And they need more support. So if that's the case, then I would recommend a student line of credit. Generally speaking, these things have like fewer rules, so they're not looking for academic progress in comparison to provincial financial aid, but a cosigner is generally needed. I recommend shopping around for the best interest rate if this is something you're looking into. So I would go to at least two banks, and I wouldn't have loyalty to your home bank necessarily. Like I would just like go to your home bank and go to another bank just to compare. And then for international students, I would check with your financial institutions from your home country. In general, I don't think international students would be eligible for a line of credit from a Canadian bank. So we're just going to spend a few slides about budgeting. I know everyone's favorite topic, making a budget. I really encourage you to think of it as a guide, not as a restriction. It's a way for you to allocate your resources to things that you want to spend your money on. You need to include both fixed and variable costs. You need to remember to budget for entertainment and other things that might be nice to have. There's like so many free budgeting templates out there. The government of Canada has a budget planner. It's like pretty detailed and like it's nice. You can save the link so you can go back to it, or it also allows you to download an Excel spreadsheet. I also have a spreadsheet that I use with students in my meetings. If that's something you're interested in, I'm happy to email you a copy. Or even if you want to sit down with someone to make a budget, I'm available this summer. Happy to go through with you line by line to kind of figure out, like, get a general sense of like what things will cost once you're here. So your fixed costs are things that are going to remain stable or are predictable. Your tuition, your residence, if you're paying rent, your meal plan, you know upfront this is what this is going to cost and it is unlikely to change. And then your variable costs, they do change from month to month and they're harder to predict. So there are your food costs. So in terms of food, I see a really large variance in what students will spend. Clothes, you're probably not going to spend the equal amount of money every month on clothes. Maybe you're not going to spend very much in the fall, but then winter rolls around and you're like, oh, I need a new winter jacket. I need boots. So these are things to, predict, to plan for so that you have that money to buy those things. Maybe entertainment, toiletries, you might have to pay for laundry, and then your transit costs. So these are some ranges of spending that I guess I recommend. Like if you are living like within a budget, then this is my own recommendations and also based on what I see students spend. Food can be anywhere from 300. I think 500 is what should be on the updated slides. So that's assuming you're mostly doing grocery shopping. So that would not include really much eating out whatsoever. I would actually classify eating out within that entertainment budget. So think of it more as like a nice to have, not a need to have. Personal care and health, maybe you have some out-of-pocket prescription costs you need to account for, that sort of thing. So 50 to 100. You will have access to gyms while you're here at U of T, so I would cancel any gym memberships, external to U of T if you're looking to cut costs. Your cell phone, if you have to pay for it, anywhere from $40 to $90. If you are on a higher cost plan, and if you own your phone outright, I recommend that you switch to a cheaper provider. It's something that I did a couple years ago, and I think I went from spending, I think $90 to $100 a month to like $40 a month. Books, again, I see a really large variance on. I see students spending anywhere from nothing to, I would say 500 is typical. I think recommend waiting to buy your books until you're actually like go to the first week of classes and get the syllabus from your teacher and see what your teacher says. Maybe they say this book is recommended. You don't necessarily need to have it. You can also take books from the library. There are used books. There's like many options here. So if you are looking to cut costs, then this is one area I would pay particular attention to. Transportation can really vary. If you're in the Innis residence, then like maybe you don't need to pay very much transportation at all, a little bit of TTC. Obviously, if you're coming from further afield, then your transportation costs will be higher. And then entertainment, $100 a month, go to a movie, go for dinner once or twice, something like that. And then there's also lots of free stuff to do in the city. There's stuff that U of T offers. The waterfront is beautiful. There's lots of parks, art installations. So there is a lot to do in the city that doesn't necessarily cost money. Okay, so the deadline is not August the 12th. It's August the 11th. That's the deadline to pay your minimum payment or defer based on an award. Um, And then if you have deferred your fees, then whether it be through OSAP or an award deferral, the deadline is September 30th. If you do not have a deferral, then November 30th is your deadline to pay your winter fees. And then if you do have a deferral, your deadline to pay your winter fees, whether you deferred based on OSAP or an award, is January 31st. The only students that get this like blanket end of April deadline is if you have like a full ride scholarship, which is relevant to like very, very few students. Okay, so the last thing I want to say is that I am available to help you. So whether you want to review a budget, if you want help creating a budget, if you need help interpreting OSAP rules and procedures. I had OSAP as a student many years ago, so I am familiar. I'm also familiar with OSAP because of the nature of my job. URO is the office that actually can like, again, see your full application. If there are changes that need to be made, they are the ones who are going to do it. But sometimes students, they get a message from URO via OSAP and they're like confused. They're like, you can always message me, Daniela, what does this mean? I'm happy to help in those scenarios. If you have unmet financial need or you have an emergency, again, I'm happy to help. And then the University Registrar's Office can assist you with like specific OSAP questions, out of province aid, US student aid, or UTAPS inquiries. Okay, so good question from Jamie. How would be the best way to check what the minimum payment will be? So that will be on your invoice. Generally speaking, your minimum payment is your fall fees. So whatever you owe in the fall related to tuition is your minimum payment to register, but it will be listed plainly on your invoice once it's created. So we have a few more minutes. If anyone has any like general questions, happy to answer them. And then again, if you have something like really specific, you can always reach out to our office and we're happy to help. The invoice will be created mid-July. So like around course enrollment is when it should be there. Okay, you're welcome. Are there any other questions? Okay, so the question in the chat is when can we defer our fees if we're eligible for it? So you can defer your fees after your invoice is created. I'm not actually sure on the exact date when like the deferral tool will like flip to on. I'm not like, you could see if it's there once your invoice is created, but if it's not there right at mid-July, I would say like in a week or something from there, like by the end of July for sure, it will be turned on. But it probably would be sooner than that. Okay, so a question. How do we add scholarship awarded money to Acorn and defer based on that? And how does it work with a full ride or a close enough one? The question, so that would depend on where the scholarship is coming for. For anyone who is getting an admission, like it depends on whether it's internal or external. So if it's an internal award, and it's full external. Okay, so that would be something you should email us. We'll have to direct you to the right office. It's the University Registrar's Office that manages external awards. I'm not actually sure what the like there are like restrictions around deferring based on external awards that I can't remember off the top of my head. So you should just email us and then we can send you that information. Okay, so next question. Will the invoice include cost reductions from awards? So initially, no. Your invoice will just include the charges. Awards are not added to your account until I want to say it could be as late as the end of September. So I know for us, like we have a few awards that we hand out, and I normally do them kind of middle of September. I have to check and make sure that everyone who's getting an award is actually registered before I can like I put in a request that the URO processes the awards. I know for some other offices, like if you got an international award from the Faculty of Arts and Science, so there are some 50K, 100K awards that are like over the 4 years. Those awards can take even longer. The goal is always that the awards are applied to your account by mid-October because mid-October is the service, that's when your service charges would be added to an unpaid fall balance. So initially you won't see that. There is a net cost tool on Acorn that is supposed to take this sort of stuff into account. It's supposed to take OSAP and awards into account. I just like, I don't have a good sense of how the net cost function works in practice. Like I've had students ask me about it and they show me the number and like the number doesn't make sense. So I honestly, I would just like use your invoice. And then if you know what award you're getting and how much it is, then you can say like, okay, I'm getting this award and it'll show up in September. And then if for some reason it's like not showing up and you have a question, you can always reach out to us as well and we can take a look and see what we can see. Okay, so a question about the awards profile. So that is managed by the University Registrar's Office, and I believe all of that is done. So if you haven't been notified yet, I would say it is unlikely that you got an award. I actually don't think that they sent decision. I think they only sent decisions to students who got an award. So if you didn't hear anything, then most likely, unfortunately, you didn't get anything.